I want to acknowledge that I know this is an ongoing conversation here. I know you all are genuinely and seriously and deeply committed to these issues and have been for a long time. So when I tried to think about who would be here today and what would be a good use of your time, given that I know many of you start teaching tomorrow, and that you may in fact be thinking about that this afternoon. And so if I see people scurry for the doors, I understand. If there's a PDF due or a syllabus that's hot off the press or something, feel free to come and go as you need to. But I realized that, that this is a really precious opportunity, not just my delight in being able to come and be with you today, but also for you to be with each other. This is a really rare, I know, really rare opportunity for you to stop, slow down, turn the BlackBerry off or the iPhone off, or turn away from the email or the Facebook or whatever else is going on, get out of the classrooms and actually sit in a room with your colleagues and think about these issues outside of a crisis. Because that's the only time in America we come together around these issues, is when there's been some disaster that's landed in our laps. And we want to share the glory, typically. So today, I'm going to, just as a little preview, we will be talking to each other. And we will have an opportunity to do some things that are perhaps a little bit more experiential than you're used to. But I'm hoping that you will surrender to the moment and just go with it. And trust me on this, by the time we're done, I think it will all make sense. And we will certainly get to some empirical research and some theoretical perspectives as well. However, what we often do as faculty is we let our cognitive processes, our theoretical affinities, take over and dominate how we approach these issues. And in fact, often what trips us in the classroom is the affective. It's the kinesthetic. It's the how do I actually respond to real people in real time when these issues begin to come up. So we're going to spend some time this afternoon on that works for you. So one of the things Diane didn't mention in her very generous introduction is that I grew up in a military family. My father was an Air Force pilot. In fact, he was part of the early pre-NASA group that were test pilots. And also, I was very clear from about 3 years old that I was gay. I was very clear about that. I even remember 3rd grade being absolutely in love with Patrick Sullivan. Just the best thing this world has ever produced. And so I grew up in a family and in a community that was consistently pretty unclear about what to do with me. Very unsure what to make of me. And I think that in many respects has grounded me through my whole life. That's a part of my identity that shaped who I am in the world, and it's both baggage and also assets. You know, it both propels me and also at times has decelerated me. So as we go through today, what I'm hoping you'll do is to think together about what accelerates you and also what decelerates you around these issues, because we're all in it together. And we all have a lot of prior experience. We've all been to this table before. And that often doesn't get acknowledged. So we'll have some time today to sort that out a little bit. So having grown up in a military family, I should say my dad's career was a little complicated. He was a military attaché too, which took me through graduate school to realize really means spy. You know, I haven't really completely embraced how nefarious that might have been. But the truth of the matter is that the state foreign service community, even more rigid than the military community. Lots and lots and lots of protocols about how to be in the world. What you say, what you do, how you dress, where you go, who you go with, who you don't go with. You know, lots and lots of conventions, and many of them unspoken. You don't really know you're in trouble until you're in trouble. So when I came as postdoctoral student to work in higher ed, which was never my intention, let me promise you, I realized pretty quickly this is a fantastic community to do diversity work in, because there is no group that is more exquisitely attuned to hierarchy and power than faculty. Hands down, better than the military. They've got nothing on foreign service. I mean, it's just incredible. So, you know, are you a doctoral student? How many people here are doctoral students? Oh yes, we know who we are, absolutely. And how many people are pre-tenure? Show of hands. Okay, yeah. I notice you're sitting sort of in close proximity. That's hurting behavior. Safety in numbers, I like that. How many people are associates? Show of hands. Okay, and full professors. I know we've got some here, absolutely. And staff. I hope we have some staff here too. No, lecturers? Long-term lecturers? Okay, all right. So we know with great detail who we are, and that within these hierarchies, there are even more subtle hierarchies. So let's say you've made it to the tenure track, which is the dream job for most folks in higher ed, and you've made it into, let's say, post-tenure. What comes next? What might come next?
Retirement?
Let's not even go there. Okay? That'll derail the whole afternoon. Well, I did not know this, but there are things called endowed chairs. Wow, who knew? Have you heard of this concept, endowed chairs? What comes with an endowed chair? Prestige, but big bucks. An enormous amount of money depending upon the chair and who's endowed it. It can be $30, $40, $60, $80, $100,000 more a year. It's enormous depending upon what institution you're at and what chair you've had. So what's the other point of the realm that most of us are pressed to do?
Time off.
Time off.
To write.
Time to write. And what typically frees you to have that time?
We have grants.
Absolutely. I knew you would know this. So what happens with grants? What are the hierarchies within hierarchies of grants? Say again. How much? How big is the grant? Well, I was just delighted to get a grant. I didn't know I had to have a certain amount. I just was like delighted to get something. So how much is your grant? And then what else?
Where it's from.
Absolutely. Take a bow. You betcha. It's not enough just to have a grant, it's where it's from. And there are certain grants that are far more prestigious than others. Absolutely. So this is all by illustration, hierarchies within hierarchies within hierarchies. So just by nature of the fact of being in the higher education environment on a daily basis, we are working with issues of power and authority and rank and hierarchy. And we often never talk about it. We really, really love this idea of, oh, we're all just people, you know, and we're all just equal. Yeah, ring a bell, absolutely. That's your department chair calling, saying absolutely not the case. It's just not. So this is, for all of us, an intimate issue as well as an intellectual issue, and I want to be clear about that. It's something everybody here knows a lot about. And for those of our colleagues who are adjuncts, who are long-term lecturers, you know, who are itinerant scholars, and there are more and more and more of us out there in the field, you know, it's even more complicated. And if you, you know, depending upon what your area of scholarship is, you know, where your specialization is, you're either more in the circle or further out of the circle. We all know that. You know, certain fields are, you know, more prestigious, carry more weight, you know, are valued differently. And this is really a part of our day-to-day lives. So when we come to these discussions today, I'm going to do a little bit of trusting that you already have a lot of knowledge about what we're doing. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing definitions or, you know, this group and that group and all of that sort of thing. I'm going to ask you to move a little more quickly than that. And I notice a lot of people have paper and pens. And does everybody have something they could write on? If you don't, we have paper here. What I'll do is I'll start it and ask you just to pass it around. So just for clarity's sake, let me explain that any writing you do will be what Peter Elba would call private writing. I'm not going to collect it, and no one's going to grade it. And also, this is not your thesis for grad students. You know, this is just a way to collect your thoughts as we begin to move into the day. So, So why is this still such a central issue for us? Why are these issues around inclusion and diversity and social justice yet still so central to our lives, particularly in the School of Ed? Why are these issues still so difficult? And this is not a rhetorical question. I really am looking for an answer. Yes?
There's a diversification of the society, how more diverse it's becoming in terms of students and
Yeah.
people with advisors.
Absolutely. Demographically, we're becoming ever more diverse. Absolutely. As a nation. Absolutely true of our undergraduate populations as well. In some levels, in some schools. Yes?
Scant resources.
Can you say a little more?
Well, you know, there's not as much fluid money, time, more effort is required. So people fear for their own place and their own position.
That's right. We've been through some very hard economic times, and we're still in the middle of them for many families and individuals. And so when that happens, we close down and we become anxious. And we are a very anxious nation right now. No question about that. Yes?
Expansion of the media and how we publicize differences and publicize how bad we have been at dealing with them.
That's right. That's right. And this is true not just nationally, but globally as well. I mean, one of the benefits and one of the traumas of the internet is we're aware of what's going on pretty globally. And the analogy that I hear a lot from my friends in the media is if it bleeds, it leads. So even the way that our media is set up these days typically leads with the sensational or the tough stuff. What else? Yes.
I think that also because we enter a system that is hierarchical,
Yes.
even as we may wish to counter the power inequities, we also become complicit in them and become a part of reinscribing what those differences are.
That's absolutely my experience as well. Did everyone hear this? Yeah, that there's a way that just by becoming part of an institution, Beverly Daniel Tatum makes an analogy of those flat escalators in airports where you don't actually even have to take a step, you just stand on it and it moves you towards it. And this is our lives. Just being in an institution, we are automatically moved towards the status quo. It takes an enormous amount of conscientiousness and energy to not move towards to not be even more deeply socialized into the institutional values and cultural values. Absolutely true. And because someone mentioned earlier time, if we're pressed for time and we're already doing two people's jobs or more, it's even harder to sort these things out in conscious and deliberate ways. Absolutely. What else? Why else?
Well, do you want to talk about politics, or is that really part of the media? I guess it's.
Well, it's very hard to distinguish these days, isn't it?
I'm sorry, I heard space and I jumped in. It just drives me crazy.
It's crazy making, it is. And it's very hard to distinguish what's the circus and what's not.
But that's really part of the subset of the media.
But the piece that I will try to build on, because I think it is appropriate, is what in fact are our public models for dialogue? What are our public models for dialogue? Just dialogue. I don't even want to say interracial dialogue, just dialogue. Who are our models?
We have them in Massachusetts.
Yes, we do. But we've got Scott Brown too, so I'm not really sure what's going on, but we'll see. My money's on Elizabeth Warren. We'll see. So, who are the models that you see in the public domain, either the politics or public intellectuals?
Jerry Springer.
Jerry Springer. Yeah, that's a very popular, very influential. There are a whole series of Fox anchors who are very influential. Oprah, very influential, absolutely, very important public figure, and does shape the thinking of many, many Americans, and also what they read, absolutely. So these are individuals. These are newscasters, or these are talk show hosts. Any models of dialogue? Can you think of any?
It's a unilogue.
Yes. I call it drive-by dialogues. Honestly, they present themselves as trying to engage in dialogue, but in fact they're lobbing points at each other. At best, they're lobbing points. Yeah, yeah. Right. So we have no cultural or social context in which our students are coming to us with the kinds of lived skills, even just by sort of moving through their communities and moving through civic life, where they might have gained some appreciation or some values or some skills, ideally some skills around these issues. So part of what's changing for us is who's coming into the classroom and what is their preparation for these kinds of encounters. Pretty marginal. So I was reading some statistics from the National Census Bureau this past week, and not surprisingly, we live in increasingly more striated and segregated communities. More now in the 2000s than in the 80s. More in the 80s than in the 60s. Most Americans wouldn't believe that, but we live in ever more refined communities. So I was reading this one article about lawyers outside of DC, and I have to say my brother-in-law's a lawyer outside of DC. But that's okay, he's family, we'll work with it. So Republican lawyers and Democratic lawyers apparently live in different zip codes. Isn't that interesting? Who knew? But you can actually tell who's living where just by affiliation and by zip code. We are enormously competent at refining our associations and our affiliations. We live in a culture that more and more and more drives into the narrow. So what had for many generations been race-driven is now also class-driven. It's not just race anymore, it's also class, it's money. So we're starting to see this understanding that these things are totally interlocked. Race, gender, class, sexual orientation, completely interlocked. You can't talk about one without talking about the rest. I know many of you know this, sort of what's broadly referred to as intersectional perspective or intersectional analysis. And the students coming into our classroom are ever more diverse and more complicated because there are more and more of them now who define themselves as mixed race. They really are literally saying, I don't want to choose. I'm all of this. I'm this and I'm this and I'm this. And you can't make me. And I'm like, okay. And probably we don't want to make them anyway. It's more complicated is better. So our demographics are changing. Our cultural context is changing. We should change the PowerPoint here and move along. So one of the things that I think is a premise is that these things are increasingly more complicated. These conversations are increasingly more complicated, and people are less and less skilled around holding them. And the way that we would typically get these social skills through our day-to-day lives, less and less options for people, less and less likely to just pick this up in the course of our lived experiences. So even on a faculty that's pretty diverse, even in a university community that has the option of some diverse perspective taking, it's very hard to get out of our hallways and actually have opportunities to talk to each other where we might learn some things, again, without being in trouble. I should say too, I'm perfectly delighted to share the PowerPoint slide. Our campus has engaged in this deep commitment to a greener way, and one of my commitments is to not run paper. So I didn't do handouts, but I'm perfectly glad to share the PowerPoints with you, or anything that will be helpful, but we'll do that later. So I think that one of the things that we often don't understand or we lose track of in the day-to-day is a systemic perspective on these issues. And I'm really at the point now where it's harder and harder for me to want to talk one-on-one or in the individual anecdotal about these issues. It's just so completely anchored systemically. And often students in my classes, I should say I teach implications of race and racism for social work practice at Smith College in the School of Social Work. And what I find, I like my students a lot, but I have to be honest, not a lot that comes out of their mouth initially is very original. It's just not. These are social scripts. These are things they've learned along the way. And I would like them to be better, and by the end of my class, I hope that they are. But initially, most of us, and particularly at the undergraduate level, aren't really holding original thoughts. These are scripts. These are social scripts. And so when we're trying to understand the individual, we really need to lift it up a couple of levels to what's going on at aggregate community levels. And to think about not just the structural diversity, but also the psychological climate and the behavioral climate. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But I think the way to get a more systemic perspective is, in fact, to have more time thinking about what has shaped our own lived experiences. Because while we're all absolutely unique individuals and we have a unique constellation of experiences and sense that we've made of those perspectives, in fact, we've come to them honestly through relationships with our family, with our communities, with our churches, with our mentors, with our educational system. And what I'm hoping we'll do today is spend some time giving you an opportunity just to stop for 5 minutes in a row and think about your own racial formation. And we're going to start with this one question. I would like you to think of 10 critical choices you've made in your life that have helped shape your attitude, your perspective. Maybe you don't like the word attitude, but your perspective on race and racism. All right, I'll give you a couple minutes to do this. There's a researcher at Yale by the name of John DeVideo, and he's done a whole body of work on modern racism. Are you familiar with this work? Yeah, a couple of people are. And one of the things that was a real epiphany for me in his work was his ability to really nicely describe how typical conceptions or the way that typical Americans conceptualize racism is in fact not really what happens anymore. It's very rare. It's really the exceptional moment when people act out in sort of what we might think of as 40s or 50s active, aggressive acts of racism. That far more frequently the way that it appears in our lives is microaggressions. Sort of really small little things. And what he terms it is withholding helping behaviors. That it's far more likely, it's not that we do overt things that harm people, it's that we don't extend, because of unconscious bias and prejudice, we don't extend helping behaviors that for folks where we feel more affiliated or identified with, we just naturally do. So it's this withholding of helping behaviors that gets in our way most regularly, both in our relationships as colleagues, but also in our relationships with our undergraduates. And so my premise with this exercise is that let me back up. How many people thought this was really easy to do? You flew right through all 3 questions. Yeah, it's really. How many people thought it was, you could get, let's say, about half. You could fill out the list about halfway. You had some sense, but you could use more time and more thinking. Okay. And how many people found it really challenging? It's like really just hard to get started. Yeah. I'm not surprised at all. I would expect this kind of a spread because it is so rare that we are afforded the opportunity and provided the invitation to stop and think about our own formative experiences. And yet, until you've done this, you are disastrously underprepared and underskilled to do this for your students. This is where the unconscious stuff comes in. If we haven't had a chance to think these things through for ourselves, what's going to happen in the classroom? Not a rhetorical question. What's going to happen in the classroom? We're going to avoid them. We're going to avoid them unconsciously and unintentionally, but we're going to shy away from them. We're going to be slow to want to just jump right in. And this is also, I hope this is a really great lead into the critical conversations session that'll come next, because that's why those conversations can appear to be so hard. So what I'm going to ask us to do is together, stand up together. Again, together, let's literally stand up. And I want you to look around the room. You can actually set your pens and papers down, but you're going to move around a little bit. I'd like you to look around the room, and you have one criteria to work with here, just one, limited to one. I want you to look around and find somebody who to you looks compassionate. Okay? I know. This is in a faculty, this is a challenge, I know. But I have complete faith you can do this. this. I know you can rise to this. I know you can do this. The thing about it is it cannot be someone you're sitting next to. It cannot be someone you're sitting next to because you likely came in and sat down in friendship networks. I'm sure you did. And so, and if it's at all possible, I'd like it not to be somebody who socially, visibly mirrors you. So if you're a white guy going gray and paunchy, please don't come find me. Make sense? Yes. So you're going to have about 10 minutes, and what I'd like you to do is share what you're comfortable with about this writing exercise. What you learned about yourself, you know, what came up for you, maybe some of the items that you wrote down. It's up to you. You pick and choose what you want. So here's the good news. You don't have to stop your conversations. We're just going to pause them for the moment. But because you are colleagues, you can pick this right back up. You now know, I hope you've met somebody and you've started a conversation. And it can go anywhere you're willing to invest in it, to take it. So it's just a beginning. So what was this like? There's no right answer to this. You can say anything you want. Mindful of whoever you were talking to. You know. So. Enlightening. Did it feel unusual?
Yes.
Yeah. I would be surprised if it didn't feel unusual. How about subversive? Yeah.
You mean the content of the conversation?
The content, the doing it, and the content. Maybe the content.
So it was easier than thinking of it, because sort of talking about it actually is kind of a relief to follow up and explain it.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I think that, in fact, the more that we do it, the better we get at it, the more comfortable we become, the more fluent and articulate we become. The reason I use the term subversive is that it is so typically the case in American society that if and when we ever talk about race, and typically we do, how do we do it? What's typical? In code, absolutely.
Very carefully.
Very enormously carefully. And who do we do it with? People like us. We talk about it in group with people who mirror us. So here's the deal. I'm totally up to speed on white guys. I totally know that perspective. You know, I am well skilled around that perspective. It's the other perspectives that I need to lean into and to benefit from. I need to hear from more women. I need to hear from more people of color. You know, I'm finding in my own life, I need to hear from more transgender people. Because even as an out gay man, that's new terrain for me. Not a part of my lived experience, not a part of my research work, you know, not a part of my family network. So unless I lean into that, which I made a commitment to doing, I'm underprepared. So the natural order of things, Bev's escalator, is to not have conversations across differences, but to do it internally. And for us to really benefit from the richness, even here in this room, you've got to make a conscious, concerted, directed effort to make decisions to put yourself in situations where you're able to have a conversation that has some mutuality to it, where you're not exchanging goods and services. You know, you're not doing something for somebody or someone's doing something for you, but you're having an opportunity to talk about your perspective. What brings you to being who you are today? Make sense? So here's the subversive part about this, is that what's the typical modality for faculty around work life? When you just think about your day-to-day life, how would you describe it? With no profanities, please. Because we're on tape. Email, absolutely. Email, lots and lots of email. Predictable, absolutely. We absolutely get in schedules and ruts, absolutely. It's how we get things done. What else?
Very scheduled.
Totally scheduled. Most of us, from the moment we hit campus until late at night, we know exactly what the next step needs to be ready for the following day. Very, very scheduled. What else?
Somewhat isolated.
Absolutely. Say a little more.
So I think a lot of times we're focused on individual productivity, which means sitting in front of a computer by ourselves and writing or reading.
That's exactly right. Because how do we win tenure and promotion? Everything about our day-to-day lives is individualistic and it's entrepreneurial. It's what are we doing or what are we putting our name on that gets the rewards. The penultimate rewards in the system go to those folks who rise out individualistically, whether or not that's truly individual work or not, but they get their name on it. So there's so much about our day-to-day institutional life that's scripted for us in ways that really absolutely drive us towards individualism and towards really only seeing the same folks over and over and over again. To break out of this, as you think about spring 2012, there's about, I don't know, maybe 8 hours left where you might actually make a decision about what's going to happen this spring. And I would hope that what you would do would center some commitment to yourself and your colleagues that you'll be conscious about how driven our schedules are and to find the right option for you, whatever that is, to try to find more opportunities to step out of the script, to talk to people you ordinarily wouldn't talk to about things you typically wouldn't talk about outside of a crisis or a problem solving or an exchange of services. Think about it. You know, I know it's late in the day to be making New Year's resolutions of this sort. However, here's the good news. Every day is a new opportunity. You know, honestly, if you did nothing but the rest of your lives, if we did nothing but think about how we might be more engaged and more connected with folks in our communities who are different than ourselves, it would be a good life. Thomas Jefferson would be proud. I threw it out. Some reference to Thomas Jefferson. I know where I am. I know where I am. Yes. So the other piece of this is that this, as a model for your undergraduates, is absolute platinum. There is nothing that will resonate more deeply or more importantly to them than knowing that you had this kind of a conversation and that you might yet have it again. Nothing, absolutely nothing you do, in deference to all the terrific research and scholarly writing that comes out of this college, none of that will matter as much to your undergrads as knowing that you actually talk to each other about these issues, that you're committed to it in that kind of a centralized way. Nothing will be more influential. So I hope that today has been an opportunity. I'm trying to end on time. I hope that that's the big opportunity today was for you folks to just have one moment together, to do this, step out of the script a little bit and to think a little bit more creatively about what you might do. And I want to say thank you again for the invitation. I hope it felt like a good use of your time. I loved being here and talking about these issues, so it was my delight. So thanks, and we'll move on to the rest of the